Okay, so do you see my screen now?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. Um, okay, let me just put back my screen. Right. Okay. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be presenting my paper, which is titled From Roots to Rates, Gender Inequality in Higher Education Opportunities in Egypt. Um, so I want to start my lecture today by a quote by Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She said, and I quote, "Until we reach equality in education, we cannot reach equality in the larger society." So, Justice Sonia Sotomayor reminds us that education is not just about schools. It shapes the fairness of the society itself. So, if the access to education is unequal, then opportunities in the labor market and the income that follows and the social mobility will also be unequal. And this idea is at the heart of my research today. So just to give you a head up about my research today, I examined gender differences and equality of opportunity in higher education in Egypt. The analysis shows that although women have slightly higher tertiary attainment, their opportunities depend more strongly on their family background, especially their parental education. So we know that every and each year, thousands of students compete for admissions to universities, such as Cairo University, for examples, and other prestigious institutes across Egypt. Um, we know that these universities are seen often as gateways to better jobs and more upward mobility. But the question I'm going to ask today, which is an important question and remains unanswered, how much of who enters these gates is determined by talent and efforts or merit, and how much is shaped by circumstances beyond a student's control, such as their family background, or the place or the region they were born, or their parent education and wealth. Okay, so now I can say that the social environment into which the individual is born in plays a critical and, if and often a deterministic role in shaping life outcomes. So this leads me to introduce the concept of inequality of opportunity. So inequality of opportunity distinguishes between outcome driven by circumstances beyond one's control, such as one's gender, one's race, parental education, or family's wealth, and those resulting from individuals' own talent or effort or merit. So, according to Romer 1998, inequality of opportunity arises when differences in outcome reflect differences in circumstances rather than effort. So, here in my paper, if access to university reflect parental education or birthplace more than individual merit, for example, we are actually observing inequality of opportunity. So this leads us to Romer's two guiding principles. We have the compensating principle, which state that inequality rooted in circumstances should be compensated as they reflect unfair advantages or disadvantages. And secondly, we have the reward principle, which states that inequalities stemming from individual efforts are morally acceptable and actually desirable and need not to be compensated. So, this framework provides a normative foundation for the distinguishing justifiable from unjustifiable inequality and underpins the empirical approach used in this study. So a little background about the education in Egypt and especially the tertiary education. So many reports show that there's actually progress at the lower levels and there's disparities at the top. So we can see that the gaps have been largely closed at the primary and the secondary levels, but tertiary access remain unequal, especially for rural and low-income youth. So we can see that there is cumulative disadvantage across the pipeline. So we can see that early inequalities in school quality tracking and parental support accumulate over the time into strike tertiary gaps, making inequality of opportunity an outcome of the whole schooling pipeline. So it's very important also to mention that family background here acts as a persistent driver. So parental education or urban residence consistently predict university access across MENA and Egypt. So we can, for example, see that children of educated or urban parents are far more likely to enroll and complete higher education compared to um, the children of less educated parents, for example. Also, the family size or the sibship size matters. So we can always see that larger families dilute time and financial resources, lowering children attainment even after controlling for the socioeconomic status of the family. And we can see that also there's intersectional disadvantages for rural girls. So for rural girls, they could face steepest barriers due to compounding effect of geography, restrictive gender norms, and poverty. And despite the fact that Egypt have free tertiary education or heavily subsidized tuition, we can see that regulative public spending, private tutoring, and early tracking favor advantageous students, and poorer students are filtered out well before university. So this leads me to the motivation of this study. So there's obviously a gap in the literature because most research now is focusing on enrollment trends overall and educational outcomes in Egypt and MENA, but very few study explicitly measure inequality of opportunity in tertiary access, and especially by gender. Secondly, we have limited micro level evidence on how specific circumstances, for example, parental education, birthplace, father labor market status, shapes men versus women chances of university entry. And despite the fact that now we hear in the headlines that there's near gender parity in aggregate enrollment, it still can coexist with larger circumstances-driven gaps in who actually reaches and complete tertiary education. So now we can state that parity does not equal opportunity. And surely this has implications for inclusive growth. So unequal access to higher education narrows the pool of skilled workers, slow intergenerational mobility, and limits the growth and the productivity gains, especially from the human capital coming from women. So, what makes Egypt an ideal case for inequality of opportunity? So, first of all, we have centralized high-stakes exams or الثانوية العامة. We have strong role of family background, rapid expansion of private universities, rapid demographic transition. So we can see that Egypt combines meritocratic rhetoric with structurally unequal starting points. So this paper contributes in three ways. First, it shifts the focus from headline gender gaps in enrollment to inequality of opportunity in tertiary education. Secondly, it provides comparable equity-adjusted measures. And finally, it goes beyond documenting gaps by using Shapley decomposition to identify which background circumstances drive inequality for each gender. So for the data used in this paper, I used the latest wave of the Egypt Labor Market Panel Survey 2023, which is a nationally representative data set administered by the Economic Research Forum. So a little bit about the data. It was collected, I believe, in 2022 and published to the public in 2023. Covering almost 18,000 households and around 70,000 individuals. It collects detailed information on parental characteristics, education history, labor markets, and social economic status in general. So for my sample selection and outcome measurement, um, participants are categorized into two groups by sex. So we have females and males. The outcome variable is post-secondary education or completion. is used as a proxy for higher education attainment. And the age range for this sample is 24 to 60 to ensure educational trajectories are completed, assuming that, for example, higher education is 4 to 5 years degree. So that leaves us with a sample size of 29,476 individuals. Okay, so table one shows us the used circumstances variables. Surely, like it depends on the availability of the circumstances which are in the survey. For the background circumstances, it's the background of the individual when he was 15, I believe. So we have the geographical region of birth, rural versus urban. We have the father's sectors and the father's occupation when the individual was 15 years old. So we have public, private, investment, international. And for the father's occupation, we have white collar versus blue collar. Parental education are categorized into three categories, both for mothers and fathers' education. We have basic or less, secondary, university, and higher. And finally, we account for the size of the family or the number of siblings by accounting for different categories. We have no siblings or one child, 2 to 3, 3 to 4 siblings, 5 to 6, and 7 plus. So one note that I would love to give is that the area of current residence is not considered a key factor. I did not consider it to prevent mixing the effect of early life location with adult migration, which could skew estimates of opportunity linked to one original community background. So I'm going to talk quickly about the methodology used in this paper. So first of all, I estimated the predicted probabilities of higher education using a logit model with the used circumstances from the previous table. Then I used uh, the mean predicted probability for the whole sample, which gives us the coverage rate. And then I use the D-index, which measures how unequal these probabilities are across circumstances grouped. And then after calculating the coverage and the D-index, that leads me to calculating the human opportunity index, which is a synthetic measure of how far a society is from universal access to a specific service or good. So it means, in simple words, access adjusted for inequality, and it's basically covers the coverage rate multiplied the penalty factor, which is 1 minus the D index. Then I compare these matrices for men versus women. To see how each variable contributes to the D index, I use Shapley decomposition to split the D-index into the contribution of each circumstances. So basically what does Shapley decomposition does is that it averages each variable's marginal effect on the D-index across all possible ordering. So their contributions are fair and add up exactly to the total inequality. So this let me move from how unequal opportunity is to what's driving that inequality and whether these drivers look different for men and women. Okay, so I thought like adding or dropping a simple example before we move into our actual result. So imagine that in this example, that's imaginary example I pulled up. If we have two groups of students in the population, and let's say they are equal in size. So in group A, let's say that 80% reach university, and in group B, let's say that only 40% do. First, the coverage rate is here is just the overall average. So since the groups are of the same size, then the average coverage rate is 60%. So if we only look at the national headline, we would say that 60% of this like population or sample reach university. But the second step, if we actually account for inequality or the D index, which measures how uneven access is across group. So we can see here that each group is 20 percentage point away from the overall average. So the D index is actually zero point 0.2. So intuitively, that means about 20% of the opportunities would have to be reallocated between groups to make access equal. So finally, the Human Opportunity Index combines both. It takes the coverage and also penalizes for inequality. So the Human Opportunity Index is the coverage, which we have here zero point 0.6 times 1 minus the D index, which is 1 minus zero point 0.2. So equals 0.48. So the main takeaway here is even though the average access looks like 60%, the level of equitable access once we account for unequal chances across group is only 48%. Okay, so before the results, this table summarizes the sample and the case circumstances used in the inequality of opportunity model. As I stated, our number of sample is 29, almost 29,000 adults, which are aged between 24 and 60, with an average age of about 39 years old and roughly 9 years of schooling. And the sample is almost evenly split by gender. So, what's important for the opportunity analysis is the distribution of the circumstances. We can see in the sample that parental education is very low for most respondents. So, we can see that around 4 out of 5 fathers and nearly 9 out of 10 mothers have basic education or less, and only a small share have university education. So we can also see that I capture early life background through birth order. We can see that most of the correspondents come from medium-sized family, 3 to 4 and 5 to 6. We can see a rural versus urban birthplace. 60% of the respondents are born in rural areas and further occupation and sectors. So we can see that almost 80% of the individuals have blue collar occupation. Finally, the outcome is completed tertiary education, which is achieved by about 1 in 5 in this sample. So this pattern in this table two suggests that family background could play a major role in who reaches university, exactly what the D index and the human opportunity quantify next. So we have here figure one, which shows the survey weighted average years of the schooling for Egyptian men, which is a solid blue line, and women, which is the dashed red line, born between 1963 to 2000. So we can see that both line increases from about 7.5 years for early males and 5.5 years for females to 12 and nearly 11 years, respectively, by the late 90s. So we can see that the gender gap, about 2 years in the 1960s, narrows over the successive cohorts and nearly vanishes by the 2000s. So we can see that this trend highlights the sustained education gains and progress toward gender parity decades. Here we have figure two, which shows the survey weighted percentages distribution of male and female respondents in the sample across 4 educational attainment categories. We have basic or less, intermediate, above intermediate, and university. So we can see in this sample that women are a bit overrepresentative in the basic or less category. Sorry. So we have almost 31.3 versus 32.2 for men. And we can see that men slightly outspace women at the intermediate and the university levels. Let's move to figure three, which shows the tertiary attainment varies greatly by family background. So we can see that the percentage of individuals who have tertiary education declines with larger sibship sizes. So from 33.6 with no siblings to 11.8 in families with 7+ children. And also the same with birth order, about 28.7 for firstborns and 19.1 for fourth plus. We can see also that parental education shows the largest gaps. Children of fathers with basic schooling have almost a 14.8 chances of university compared to 74.6 for fathers with a university degree. We have a similar pattern exist for mothers. So we can see 17.2 versus 85.5. Also, urban born respondents are most likely to complete tertiary education than rural born. So we can see 31.2 versus 18.4. Also, we can see that children of white collar fathers reach tertiary education at the percentages of 47.5 versus 15.4 for blue collar. And we can see that children of fathers who work in government or public enterprise have the highest completion rate compared, for example, with children of private working fathers. So we can see that overall higher education in Egypt is linked to family size, birth order, parental schooling, parental socioeconomic status, and not evenly across each and every background. Um, Figure 8.1 is talking or telling the similar story of the previous figures. We can see that, for example, children with university educated parents average almost 4 to 5 more years of schooling than those whose parents have only basic education. Similar children in smaller families tend to stay in school longer than those in larger SIPships. Okay, let's move to the next. And here we have the generalized Lorenz curves. It highlights that the advantage groups consistently outperform disadvantageous ones. So, for example, here we can see at the 50th percentile, children of university educated parents have more accumulated years of schooling than all the lifetime of children of less educated parents by that point. So this shows us that advantaged group benefit from a higher average schooling and more equal distribution, while disadvantaged groups faced firstly lower levels and secondly wider disparities. So overall, what does this figure tells us that educational opportunities in Egypt is doubly unequal, favoring the well-born in both level and distribution, thus reinforcing intergenerational disadvantages or disadvantages. Okay, so let's move to the results. Here we have table 3, which shows the survey weighted marginal effects from sex-specific logic models predicting tertiary completion. Overall, we can see that siblings and birth order do not show robust association for either gender. So we can see effects are small and statistically insignificant. The cleanest or the clearest pattern is parental education, especially for women. Having a father with secondary or higher education increases a daughter or woman's probability of completing tertiary education by roughly 19 to 23 percentage points, while the corresponding effects for men are smaller and less precise or insignificant. So for men, we can see that urban birthplace raises tertiary attainment by about 10 percentage points, and having a white collar father adds about 12 points. Similarly, these advantages are not statistically significant for women. Also, it's worth mentioning that father sector of employment does not show meaningful differences relative to government, and age adds a little once background is controlled. So the main takeaway from table 3 is that women's tertiary attainment is most strongly stratified by parental schooling, while men's attainment reflects urban and white-collar advantages. Okay, so this figure 8.3 is a picture version of table 3. Dots are the average marginal effects, and the bars are the confidence intervals. The key takeaway is the same. We have the parental education matters most for women, while urban and white collar backgrounds matter more for men. We can see that most other effects are small. Okay, so here we have table 4, which summarize equity adjusted access to tertiary education by gender. We can see that women have higher coverage, about 26% compared to 22% for men, I'm sorry, but they also face higher inequality of opportunity. We can see that the T index is 0.33 for women versus 0.27 for men, meaning access depends more on the background for women. So, as a result, the equity penalty is larger for women. And when we combine coverage and inequality into the Human Opportunity Index, the scores are very close. We can see that women are slightly higher, 17.2 versus 16.1 for men. So, the headline or the takeaway from this table is that women reach university a bit more often, but their access is more unequally distributed by circumstances. So here we have the Shapley decomposition of the D index in table 4. So what does the Shapley decomposition tells us one more time? It tells us which circumstances explain inequality of opportunity for each gender. So here we can see that for women, inequality is overwhelmingly driven by parental education. So we can see that father education accounts for about 42%, and mother's education accounts for about 30% of a daughter's probability to attain higher education. For men, the main drivers are different. We can see that father's occupation account or explains about 34%, and the place of birth about 26%. And the father education contributing much less. So we can see that the sources of inequality are gendered. Family schooling matters most for women, while class and geography matter more for men. And importantly, these patterns accord with the average marginal effect from the Logit models. So we saw that the circumstances with the sizable average marginal effect account for the most measured inequality. One important note about table 4 is that I also control for age and its square term to adjust for generational effect. So we know that it's more likely that older cohorts tend to have parents with lower educational attainment and also wider gender gaps in schooling. So ensuring these age-related differences do not confound the decomposition results. This is a picture result of the previous table. We can see that women are attainment is largely driven by parental education versus men are broadly driven by father's occupation and for a place of birth. I also did a robustness check using a rank approach to intergenerational educational mobility. So, in this framework, the slope beta measures persistence or how strongly children's education rank tracks their parental rank. So, of course, a steeper line means we have lower mobility or greater persistence. So here I found beta equals 0.42 for men and 0.49 for women. And if we want to interrupt it as mobility, which would be 1 minus beta, and that would be about 0.58 for men versus 0.51 for women. So what does that tell us? That tells us that a 10-point increase in parental rank is associated with about 4.2 points for sons and 4.9 points for daughters, suggesting that daughter outcomes are more tightly tied to family background or parental education, to be precise, which is consistent with the Shapley decomposition that we found earlier. Okay, so to conclude, uh, The findings are that women's average access to tertiary education are slightly higher, but their opportunity are more unevenly distributed by family background. We also learned that the drivers are different by gender. So we can see that parental education dominates for women, while father's occupation and place of birth, whether like rural or urban origin, matters more for men. And we also saw that the mobility check or the robustness checks point to a stronger persistence for daughters. So focusing only on parity in average can miss substantial inequality of opportunity. So, what does that tells us regarding to policies? So, the tools that I have shown today are one way to make these invisible starting point gaps visible and to hold our systems accountable for closing them. So, based on the decomposition, we saw that women inequality is mostly tied to parental education, while men's is more tied to regional and occupational background. So the policy logic should follow, and uh, if we want to raise coverage overall, that's good. But also, we should directly reduce these background penalties, especially by, for example, strengthening secondary pathways, lowering rural barriers, especially for men, and targeting support to rural students and to daughters of low educated parents. So surely this paper or this research have some limitations. So first of all, this is a cross-sectional ELMPS 2023. So I'm describing associations and not tracking changes over time or making casual claims. And secondly, I focus on tertiary completion as a binary outcome. So the analysis does not capture differences in quality, prestige, field of study, or the labor market value of degrees. So thirdly, the opportunity measures used observed circumstances only, which is also like very typical in inequality studies. So we can see that factors that actually matters are not sometimes included in surveys, such as like private tutoring, school quality, and local norms are not observed. So the D index and the human opportunity index should always be interpreted as a lower bound of the true inequality. And the Shapley shares reflect the contribution of the circumstances of the circumstances that we can only measure. And there's always potential indigeneity. So some circumstances, for example, parental education or wealth, may proxy for other unmeasured or unobserved factors, for example, like aspiration, network, wealth, and so on, possibly biasing our Shapley contributions. So, overall, these results are best read as a clear picture of how strongly background correlates with higher education access and where the certification differs by gender. So, based on the limitations, we of course have some recommendations for future researchers to build on. So, of course, we can start using more waves of the LMPS or other surveys that are done by the economic research form. So we can track educational trajectories across waves to see how opportunities actually change over time. We can actually also incorporate additional factors such as a private tutoring use, peer networks, personal effort, and so on for a more complete picture of inequality drivers. Surely this could be done by improving survey measurements and, for example, encouraging future LMPS models to capture more and more background circumstances. We can also do intersectional approaches to analyze how socioeconomic background intersects with gender, geography, ethnicity, or disability to better understand the compounded disadvantages. And it's very important also to keep evaluating the policy interventions that we do. So we can, from time to time or after the policy is done and we can see the effect of it to access the effectiveness of, for example, need-based scholarships, bridging programs and information campaigns using experimental or quasi-experimental designs. And also we can examine post-university outcomes. So we could investigate not only who completes higher education, but also differences in the degree, prestige, field, and labor market outcomes. Okay, so why does this matter beyond Egypt? So this matters beyond Egypt because many countries are seeing progress in enrollment, and even they are seeing progress in gender parity and closing gender gaps in all educational levels. But opportunity can still be unequal when family background and birthplace shapes who reaches university. So the human opportunity frameworks helps us separate how much access exists from how fairly it is distributed. And the Shapley decomposition shows which circumstances drive inequality. So this approach is very much transferable to other contexts and can guide where to target resources to reduce these inherited disadvantages. So when we do this, we can ensure that we achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which ensures inclusive and equitable equality education and promote lifelong learning opportunity for all. So so the question here for Egypt and for many other countries is not how many university seats we finance, but whose children those seats are effectively reserved for. So equal rules are not enough because the starting points are not equal. What we need that equal opportunity requires confronting the unequal starting points, which are baked into class, gender, and geography. So I want to end my lecture by saying that treating students fairly is only equitable if all students start from the same point. Um, Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you, Hamza. And I'll give you back the mic if you have any questions for me.
Thank you for the rich and insightful lecture. So, when it comes to questions, there is a couple of questions like what uh, what does equal opportunity actually look like in practice?
Mhm.
And if your parents are disadvantaged, are you automatically disadvantaged too? Given that financial aids like conditional and unconditional cash transfers has its problems as well if we implement it. For now, those are the questions for now. If you could answer them.
Okay, so
Thank
what
you.
was the first question?
What does equal opportunity actually look like in practice?
Okay, so I stated in this lecture that students do not start from the same starting points. So if we want to give students the same opportunities, so we have to account for the disadvantages that some students start from. So if we have, so for example, as the findings of this research states that, for example, girls of lower educated parents or have lower probabilities of attaining higher education. So maybe we should focus more on giving more scholarships or enhancing the quality of the secondary schools at the areas which have lower educated individuals to increase the chances that they actually go and compete and enter universities. So we have actually to account for the disadvantages, for example, for the sons who are living in underserved areas, rural areas that do not have the same facilities and the infrastructures and the universities, or maybe the resources that better resources urban-born sons are do have. So that's why we have to do the Shapley decomposition to see which circumstances are driving inequality and act based on it. So for it, this is for Egypt. Maybe for other countries, we could see that it's mainly driven by ethnicity or skin color, and that's where we have to like aim our resources to better put these resources in the hands of individuals who suffer from most of this and disadvantages, give them more um, merit need scholarships in order to try to level the playing field.
Yeah.
What was the second question, Hamza?
The second question was complementary. It was if your parents were disadvantaged, and are you automatically disadvantaged too, given that conditional and unconditional cash transfers has its problem as well in the case of financial aid?
Yes, of course, this is a very nice question. It does not mean that you're automatically advantage or disadvantage, and this is tied to intergenerational mobility that we see in a country, which is a second word that we can describe inequality of opportunity. So, for countries with higher mobility, it means that the sons and the daughters' rank or level in life are not very tightly tied to their parental rank. So there we have like you can get like higher income, higher levels of education, and so on, and can actually we have less persistent and higher mobility in overall. But in some countries, which is the case, for example, in Egypt, as I showed you, like it was 40, the mobility, the beta was, I guess, 53 and 51. 0.53 and 0.51. So it's almost like a high persistent, for example. And it's the case, for example, for the United States and which has lower intergenerational mobility or higher persistent. It means you cannot really like move far beyond your parental rank. This could be like tied to the resources available in a country. Surely we have countries, for example, like the OECD countries, they have like the higher intergenerational mobility worldwide. It means that your rank doesn't like automatically reflect your parental rank. So that's a good sign because it means that the circumstances that you are born into does not reflect what you could achieve later in life, rather than how strongly or how hardly you put effort on. So if you're putting more effort, studying more, like working harder, you could actually move more and more in the socioeconomic status.
Yeah, which ties up to the labor market and externalities that exist in the country, which as you have explained.
Yes, well, I would love that
Yeah.
all countries have high intergenerational mobility and low persistent everywhere. And I would love that all kids would achieve their full potentials, no matter the circumstances they are born into. And I wish all policymakers pay special attentions for the disadvantaged students in order to help them reach their full potential worldwide, especially in the MENA countries.
So there is another question about the advancement of Egypt. How has Egypt's education improved from how it was in the early 2000s to right now, for example? Is there an improvement or is it stale? How
Uh,
is it going?
Okay, so I'm not an expert in in Egypt's education, but I could see that I guess Jamal Abdel Nasser made it higher education free in 1972, and that boosted the enrollment rate. So we said that the gender gap in enrollment have nearly been closed, but I also stated that tertiary education in Egypt is heavily subsidized or free, which would you think that that would lead to less inequality and more people enrolling. But surprisingly, many research find that it's actually have higher rates of inequality of opportunity in higher education compared to other MENA countries that actually offer um, uh, do not offer free education or actually have tuition, such as Jordan, which is which is puzzling a little bit, but that drives us that making making university or higher education free is not always the answer because that's leaves the previous levels with little less resources to be spent on. So if we spend more on higher education, that actually means that we are spending less on secondary, elementary schools. So that actually makes the disadvantages students more disadvantaged if they receive less in the previous levels, and that actually lowers their chances to complete higher secondary education and move to tertiary education. So it's good like if you want to increase enrollment, but also you have to see where are the inequalities coming from. So maybe if we uh, reduce the regressive spending, spend more on elementary levels, that would increase the chances of boys who are disadvantaged to stay in school, girls who are disadvantaged to stay in school and not leave school early for early marriage, and so on.
Circling,
What is it?
circling back to the fact that the father's education impacts the outcome of the daughter's higher education
Yes,
outcome.
yeah, yes,
Uh, is there any cultural belief that makes that less educated parents made them more rigid, so there is more lack of
yes. So
opportunity to make them
yes, yes. I stated that we maybe in the future waves of the Olympics, we can actually start capturing local norms about the beliefs about education. So it's widely known that children of highly educated parents or like higher educated parents know the benefits of education more than lower educated parents. So they know the returns to education, they know the benefits of higher education, they know like the value, the market value of a degree and the prestige that comes with it. So they are more likely to support their children and they're more likely to encourage their children to put more effort. And also that like correlates with the overall picture that higher educated parents are more likely to be having better paying jobs and better socioeconomic status overall. So that they can like support financially, support through networks. They are more likely to be located near better schools and universities. So that enhances the intergenerational advantages or disadvantages. So they know. So that's very important that we always go back to the disadvantages groups and maybe we give them information campaigns and give them like scholarships to introduce them and encourage them to stay in school, make them know what's the benefits, what's the reward, what's the returns to education. And also could be changing some social beliefs, social norms about, for example, if some ruler locations would not enhance or encourage girls to go to higher education or actually complete secondary education, we could like play on that in order to uh, increase education and decrease any risks that could come after the girls dropping out of schools.
So a last question, if you
Yes,
could.
of course.
Uh, so to to have less inequality in
Mhm.
during for enrollments for higher universities, would could we like fix it by fixing the inequalities in school first, like in
Yes,
secondary, high school? That
yes,
would be
yes.
the most
So
preventive
yes, this is the
measure.
most important part because you can prevent inequality by investing directly in previous levels. So we can see there's a stark inequality of the quality of the education itself that comes before the tertiary education. So we can see some schools in rural areas do not have as many teachers or does not have as many resources or desk or heating and any infrastructure for students, where like parents with more resources, they could afford private schools with international curriculum, for example. They could afford also international universities and so on. So if you invest more in secondary level, decrease the inequalities in that level, enhance the quality of the education there, make sure that each student in that level can fulfill his potential. That will automatically increase the chances of the poorer, less resource students to go beyond secondary and go to tertiary education. So what's the point here is that across the pipeline or across the education systems, the advantaged students have better resources from outside and inside. So they accumulate advantages and go to the next level, where are the less advantaged students. They are filtered out early. They have accumulated disadvantages across the pipeline, which is like coming from their background circumstances, from their very own household, and also from the outside environment. They did not get as much private tutoring. They did not get as much as the quality education. Some, for example, uh, maybe some students do not have a nearby school, or maybe they have uh, a teacher to student ratio, which is very low. They have very low students compared to very low teachers compared to the students number. So if we start acting on the inequalities prior to the tertiary level, of course, that would help eliminate a great deal of inequality of opportunity.
Well, thank you for answering our questions and for this rich and insightful lecture. Well, on behalf of the Social Science Lab, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Yusra Alkasasbeh for such a thought-provoking and insightful presentation. To all our attendees, thank you for being part of these conversations. Your engagement and curiosity are what makes these sessions so valuable. We look forward to welcoming you back for our upcoming Saturday lecture, and we encourage you to stay connected with the Social Science Lab for future events and discussion. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, Hamza,
Thank
and
you.
looking forward future collaborations with the MENA social labs.
Inshallah.
Thank you
Eid
so
Mubarak,
much.
Said. Bye bye.
Thank you, Eid Mubarak.
How do I stop the recording if